If you'd like to go ahead and start turning to the book of Acts, the 8th chapter. This past week I heard somebody make a comment, I guess I didn't hear, I read, but most of the time it seems like I'm hearing it definitely on Facebook, all the rant and raving that goes on. And I was just kind of strolling through and just happened to read this comment out of the blue, and the question this looked like a young lady asked. It was to this Church of Christ page on Facebook. Whoever runs the page is always asking these questions, trying to get people to think outside the box. I'm kind of happy what they do. It gets people thinking. And this looked like a young girl asked, well, why don't you teach everybody? I thought, well, what does she mean by that? Maybe she has some history with this group, I don't know. But the question stuck with me, why don't you teach everybody? And I got to thinking about the early church. I got to thinking about their commission, Matthew chapter 28, 18 and 19, going to all the world and preach the gospel. And then I go to Colossians chapter 1, and I believe the 23rd verse, or around verse 23, teaches us that the early church taught all the creatures under heaven. So they were busy during their time, and they didn't overlook anybody. Yet I find myself, and I find, witnessing sometimes people overlooking certain classes of people. Either they're too high to reach, or they're too low to be bothered with. And I think we all have been in one of those two cases. Sometimes you don't want to deal with somebody just because you don't want to, but they are still needing to hear the gospel. And so I got thinking about some people within Scripture that were not overlooked, but were on a higher scale than normal. And we're not going to look at the low-end scale that man has put on society. We have obviously ranked people from poor to rich to unpopular to popular. Now, none of that even matters. We do it, and we do it subconsciously. We do it without thinking about it. When you see a homeless man or a homeless woman on the street, it automatically your mind thinks that they don't want to work. That's one of the first things that will come to your mind, is they do not want to work. Not that they may be having a rough time, not that they may just got laid off because they didn't want to ingest something into their body. We don't know, but the first thought's what? They don't want to work. I don't want to give them money. That's one of the first things majority of humanity would think. So first is found in Acts 8th chapter. Now for those that are familiar with the eunuch, most of the time people just know that Philip taught the eunuch was baptized, they went on their way rejoicing. That's the normal thought process of the eunuch. But have you considered who the eunuch was and his standing in society and the society where he was from? Now, verse 26, now an angel of the Lord spoke to Philip, saying, arise and go towards the south along the road which goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. This is desert. So he arose and went, and behold, the man of Ethiopian, a eunuch of great authority under Candace, the queen of the Ethiopians. So this man, not just a common traveler of Ethiopia going to Jerusalem. Now, obviously, Ethiopia at this time is a lot different than it is now. Now we view it as a third world country. But then it seemed to be a little bit more in order. And this particular man was over the queen's treasury. So this man had a good standing in his community. This man was high up, I would say, in his political standings to be this close with the queen. Now, we've run into people of high standards in the community. And not just a high way of living. I'm just meaning you may run into the local sheriff. You may run into the mayor. You may run into people like that and say, well, they're just a little too high. They're not going to listen to some peasant like me. I don't know what may go through your mind. But I think that a lot. Like if I bumped into the president, would it even be worth my time to try to talk to him? Or am I going to have to be vetted for hours and hours before I can even talk to him? So it's even worth my time. I find myself asking these hypotheticals all the time. And it doesn't matter who it is. Someone pops up on the news, it's like, could I even get a chance to teach that person? And if I did, how would I even start the conversation? But a lot of times it ends up being, in my mind, well, I'm going to find someone that's more accessible. Well, who's worthy of hearing the gospel? All people. I have to remind myself of that. All people are worthy to hear it from my lips. Even if I know they heard it from somebody else, I'm going to at least give them a chance that maybe I can bring something to the table they didn't hear, or a way they didn't hear it, that may cause them to think about something. And so that's the way I view one of my duties is to teach, is I'm going to find a way to teach someone that hopefully will have an impact. And if it doesn't, I'm not going to tell people to never teach that person. You may just have to find another way to teach them. And so when Philip was given this charge to go, he didn't care. He did not care that he was a man of high standings. He did not care that he was a treasurer to a queen of a country. He said yes, and he went. He did not mind who he was. And so, of the great outcome, let's go towards the end of this section. We're probably all very familiar with this. And so, in verse 34, it says, "So the eunuch answered and said to Philip, I ask you, of whom does the prophet say? Of himself or some other man? And then Philip opened his mouth and began at the scriptures, preached Jesus to him. Now as they went down the road, they came to some water. And the eunuch said, see, here is some water. What is hindering me from being baptized? And Philip said, if you believe with all your heart, you may. And he answered and said to him, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And so taking that jump, no matter who he was, this had a great outcome. Looking past him being who he was. And some people, that's all they seek. I don't know how many evangelists you've been around in your Christian life, but you know they come in different varieties. You have some evangelists that they want to go to the nursing homes. They want to go to hospice homes. You have some evangelists that only want to go to school grounds. They want to go to colleges. You have some evangelists that only want to deal with athletic people. So you have all different types of evangelists that don't just evangelize everyone they see. They have a specialty in different types of people. And I think that's wonderful that people can really connect with other people. Like me, I can't connect with a hockey player. I don't know nothing about hockey. But I can go to the school and I can connect with a basketball player because I have a good history of basketball. And so I probably would have more of a chance to teach someone that's in that standing than someone that's not. And so a lot of people don't think about that when it comes to, people that evangelize. But when I'm reading about the early church, it seemed like they didn't really care who you were. There were some cases with Paul, some cases with Peter, they kind of went back and forth. But most of the time, the early church did not care who you were going to hear the gospel one way or another. And that comes from the book of Colossians. And I made the comment, and if you didn't realize that was there, let's go ahead and read it. Colossians chapter 1. And I want to say, for some reason, this verse always gives me trouble on memorizing. But I believe it's verse 23. I may be wrong, but we'll find it. Colossians chapter 1. Yes, in verse 23. If indeed you consider in faith, grounded and steadfast, and are not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you heard, which was preached to every creature under heaven. And so I have to take Paul's word at face value. Every creature. I believing that every means every. And that they taught the souls of the world the gospel doesn't mean the whole world was saved at one point. It just means they all heard the gospel of Jesus Christ, or the gospel which Paul's talking about. And so they didn't underlook or overlook nobody. They seen someone and said, what? That person is worthy of the cause of Christ. They're worthy of the gospel. And so Acts chapter 10, Acts the 10th chapter, we run into somebody else that would have been of a pretty good standing in his time. And that is Cornelius. Acts chapter 10 and verse 1, there was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of what is called the Italian regiment, a devout man of one who feared God with all his household, who gave alms generously to the people and prayed to God always. This man was looked at as a pretty decent human being, but he was of probably more of a higher standard, a higher on the list of the social ladder, being in the position he was in. Now, I don't know nothing about this. I don't know what it's like to be, on that different of a level. I haven't been around many people like that. That's been, on a level where they're famous or they're very well known or very highly respected in their communities. A lot of people around here, we just don't think like that compared to some of the bigger cities. And so, I haven't been put in a position where there's been someone that's next to me that is, maybe our governor. Let's put our governor on the stand. Would I teach our governor? Well, absolutely I'd teach my governor, but it'd probably take many hoops to jump through. I think that's what stops people from trying to evangelize the political scene. Because I've heard, like I mentioned earlier, I've heard of many, and I've met many evangelists who are evangelists over here, but I've never met one that says, well, I go to the Capitol building. I go to here and try to reach. I've never heard one say that before. And I know of a lot of members of the church that say, we don't even try to go there because of who they are. Well, just because they're a politician doesn't mean they can't hear the gospel. It doesn't mean that they could have a life-changing moment that could impact the society they represent. And I know I've thought that way. Well, if I would try to teach our president, because he don't want to hear it because of what he stands for. Well, I don't know that. I have no idea. Now, it was very encouraging to me a couple years ago. I always wondered how close a member of the church has gotten to in the White House, to teach someone in the White House. And then I seen a picture of two brothers in Christ sitting there in the White House with the president. I thought, whoa, that's a good feeling to know that members of the church can get that close to some very powerful people. And I hope that they somehow, some way, slipped him the good news of the gospel. And so just because there are great big people in the world should not stop us from thinking about ways to evangelize them. And, we live in a society today. You can get on your phone, you can get on Twitter, and you can tweet somebody right to them. You don't have to go through this big chain of people. You just tweet their name out, and they get to read it. Now, will they read it? I don't know. I know they got PR people that do that, but still, you can, if you're thinking of someone that, it'd be good for them to hear this. Even if they don't respond, it'd be good for them to hear us. We live in a day, you can do that. We can take advantage of those outlets. So people like Cornelius, and what was the outcome of Cornelius? He and his household were what? Baptized. They obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ because somebody did not overlook him for being who he was during this time. Now next we have Lydia. Lydia would have been a very known woman. And a lot of people try to teach history of women that it was just degrading. It was not just degrading in the history of women. Acts 16 shows you a clear stance on who Lydia was. She had women that were with her. She was very respected and very well known in her community. And you got to think of, who Paul was and his origins. Going to someone like Lydia probably didn't happen every day. And this is what catches my attention is when people are overlooking, nationality. They're overlooking race or language or color. And when I'm reading about cases like this in Acts, gives me a hope for today that we can break those barriers down. And last night, we were doing those fires. I guess somebody was lighting fires last night. I don't know if you got any wind of that in Newton County, but hopefully they tracked the person down. Well, I was riding around with he's our retired chief, but he still goes out because he has nothing better to do at night. So I was riding around with him. I'm always trying to mention something. He has God on his mind. He has good morals on his mind, but I always try to find a way to get a little extra in there, a little more in depth on a certain topic that may be brought up. And And so we got to talking about, modern people, the way that they're reacting when a verdict doesn't go the way they want. A lot of people start rioting or they'll start looting and stuff like that. And he told me, he says, when the looting and rioting happened, with the Black Lives Matter movement, it caused me to have some resentment towards black people. I said, well, I think that'd be natural because that's all you would see is black people doing this and that. It'd be a natural thing. He says, well, then I had to pause and realize who was feeding me that information. He said, it's people that I don't know. He says, I'm not there on the scene. He said, then I had to stop myself and realize how ridiculous it was that I was starting to feel that way. I said, that's around here. And he says, well, what do you mean? I said, there's nationality resentment even in our area. People have a resentment towards different colors, and you may not even realize it. And he asked me to keep explaining. I said, okay. I said, one of the things I want to do to the best of my ability, being a Christian, is I want to break down the views of different colors and different races. I think it's one thing that's ridiculous to look at someone and say, well, they're of this, they're of this, they're of this, and so they're this way. That's what they're trying to teach with Caucasians, is you guys are naturally racist because you're white. That's ridiculous. What am I supposed to do? I'm half Caucasian. Am I supposed to half hate myself or half be racist? See, the logic is ridiculous. So anyways, I was talking to him. I said, I want to break down those walls that people have built up because of all this stuff that's been going on. He says, well, how are you going to do that? I said, I've been doing it for years. I said, I had some family members tell my in-laws, I think it's ridiculous, but here I am smiling about it, telling my in-laws that birds don't even mix with each other. That's what they were telling my in-laws about me and Cheyenne. Obviously, Cheyenne's white and I'm not fully white. And they didn't really say nothing, so every time I went to a dinner, every time I went to a Thanksgiving, Christmas, I found every person there, and I gave them a big hug, and I gave them a big kiss on the cheek. Now, we had a Thanksgiving dinner yesterday. They come up to me, and guess what they do to me? They gave me a big hug. Now, they don't kiss me, but they give me a big hug. And so whoever it was, it got broken down. That's what I'm trying to do, is get people to look past race, sometimes even religion, and look past those things and realize every soul is worth hearing the good news. It doesn't matter how they treat you. It doesn't matter how filthy their mouth may be or what they've done in the past. Every soul is worth it. And the Book of Acts is a great example that every soul, to the apostles' eyes, to a lot of the disciples' minds, they're looking at them as they need to hear this message, no matter how great, no matter how little they may seem in society. And Lydia was that way. Acts 16 and verse 12. Now, there are several cases where people of color were being converted. I mean, you have the Ethiopian. 99% that he was probably of a very dark complexion, but yet didn't bother Philip. He was a soul that needed to hear the truth. That's the way we look at people. There are two ways to look at human beings, and those who are saved and those who are lost. That's it. That's your only concern. If you can't speak their language, you can get on your phone and do it that way. Just speak into it, and it will speak that person's language. So language is no longer, unless it's some far-off dialect, language is not even a separator no more. I can go to China right now, whip out my phone, and look at a menu, and it will tell me in English what it is. So there's no excuse. Well, I can't speak their language. Yeah, you can. Your phone will do it for you. That's your translator. Go on and teach the gospel. There's really, now in 2021, there's no excuse that we can't teach somebody. There should be nothing that's stopping us from teaching the gospel to the world. I can't come to you and say, well, I just couldn't do it. There's no excuse anymore, unless the language is really that far off that even Google doesn't know it. Then there's no excuse that we shouldn't be evangelizing and teaching and trying to set examples for those around us. No excuse. And so let's look at Lydia real quick. And I just got one more example before we dismiss this morning's worship service. Acts 16, we'll start here in verse 12. And then we'll continue on to verse 16. So in verse 12, and from there in Philippi, Yeah, and from there to Philippi, which is the foremost city of the part of Macedonia, a colony. And we were staying in the city some days. And on the Sabbath day, we went out of the city to the riverside, where praying was customarily made. And we sat down and spoke to the woman who we met there. Now a certain woman named Lydia heard us, and she was a seller of purple from the city of Thyatira, who worshipped God. The Lord opened her heart to heed these things spoken by Paul. And when she and her household were baptized, she begged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay." So she persuaded us. Why bring in Lydia to the scene? Well, for me, it'd be very hard for me to just go into a woman's house, but for any reason at all, without someone there to be a witness. That's one thing that a certain evangelist was telling me is, when you go evangelizing, you need to have someone with you to be a witness, because you may open the door and it's a widow. You may open the door and it's someone whose wife and her husband's not home. You need someone to witness these things and make sure everything's done right. Because just because you're a Christian doesn't mean that bad things can happen. And so Paul here did not care of her origin, of her being a seller of purple, of her being from Thyatira. Even women were with her. I mean, this woman is not just some common woman. She would have definitely stood out during this time. And so Paul looked past those things, and he taught her the gospel, and the outcome was the same. They were baptized, and he stayed with them to teach them. Now continue to verse 16. Now it happened, as we went to prayer, that a certain slave girl possessed with spirit of divination met us, who brought her masters much profit for fortune telling. This girl followed Paul and us and cried out, saying, "These men are the servants of the Most High God, who proclaim to us the ways of salvation." And this she did for many days. But Paul, greatly annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And he came out that very hour. But when her masters saw their hope of profit was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them to the marketplace to the authorities. They brought them to the magistrates and said, "These men, being Jews accustomed, which are not lawful for us, being Romans, to receive or to observe." Then the multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates tore off their clothes and commanded them to be beaten with rods. And when they had laid many stripes on them, they threw them into prison and commanded the jailer to keep them securely. Having received such a charge, he put them into the innermost prison and fastened their feet in the stocks. And so, a lot of times when I'm looking through the book of Acts, reading of cases like this, I put myself in their position, ask myself, what would I do in return? I have no right to be treated this way. Are they worthy of hearing the gospel from my lips? My first thought would be no. I wouldn't want to teach them the gospel because they're treating me unfair. And that's part of human nature. We, most of the time, do good to those who do good unto us, and we don't really do anything bad, but we won't go out on the limb to do things for people that are bad to us. That's normally the way it works. And I think it's just part of nature. It's easier for us to do good to those who do good to us, but we know that's not the life of a Christian. And here's a great example. They're thrown into the inner prison, fasten their feet in the stocks. And so a lot of historians have this, that they were upside down, fastened upside down. And the dungeons is really what it was. Probably no light whatsoever. And they were fastened upside down in the inner prison. Now, what were Paul and Silas? What was their focus? Their focus was on whom? Their focus was on God. They were not focused necessarily that they were in prison for no valid reason, that they were probably going to be led to certain death for no valid reason. They looked to God, and so that allowed them to block off all those worldly thoughts they probably had about the jailer, about the magistrates, about the system that they were in. And so, what was the outcome of the Philippian and the jailer? We know this outcome. Look at verse 30. And he brought them out after the great earthquake, after the prison doors were open, and the prisoner or the jailer was going to take his life. They stopped him, and he says, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And so the men that was probably just beating on him, there's none of that being mentioned. There's not Paul smack talking this guy before he taught them the gospel. They just went on to teaching him the gospel because they knew that no matter how bad the physical was, the spiritual is so much greater. No matter how bad people may treat you physically, the spiritual outcome is always greater. So the outcome is that they taught them. He says, "What must I do to be saved?" Verse 31, so they said, "Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you will be saved, you and your whole household." They spoke the word of the Lord to him, to all who were in his house. They took in the same hour of the night and washed their stripes, and immediately he and all his family were baptized. And so there's one thing that I can encourage the church this morning while we are alive and we are breathing, that when we leave here this morning, that we look past race, we look past now language. It's not necessarily a barrier much anymore. And we look past sometimes people's past. How hard is it to forget some of the things people's done? And it's tough. I don't think we truly can forget some of the things that people done. But when you're teaching someone the gospel, those are the things you don't look at. I don't necessarily. Because I can't hold that. I can't hold someone's past to their present because I don't know what's happened from the past to the present. I don't know what change has happened in their life. And there's been some members of the church at a certain area, you can probably guess the area, where I was being taught that didn't want me to go because of my past. And I had people that wouldn't give up because they didn't care what I used to do. And so you have both sides of that in the church. So it's not a big surprise that some people will say, well, he's too bad. He's done too much against God that I'm not going to teach him. And this morning I had a question asked in Bible class about Jesus eating with the Pharisees. Jesus ate with a lot of bad people that wanted him to die and eventually put him to death. Jesus was sharing meals with them because Jesus knew that every soul was valuable. And so I hope today when we leave here that we look at every soul that we come across as worthy of hearing the gospel. I know they're worthy because Jesus died for all people. And we need to make sure that we're spreading the noise that we here at Bergman do not care of your race, of your religion, of your background. You're worthy of hearing the good news. They need to know that about us. And I hope they do. I'd say they know that about the majority of us. But we need to get it more abroad. Facebook needs to know it. The social media world needs to know that we here in this small, hillbilly-ish of a town care about all souls that come across our vision or our thumbs on Facebook. We care about people. And I think people know that. But right now, the world's not receiving that, as you can tell. There's a lot of division. There's a lot of hatred between colors, between religion. And the church is supposed to be a beacon of hope, a beacon of light that people can see and want to go to. It's like a bug in a bug zapper, but yet we're not going to kill you. We're going to save you. We should be drawing people in. And one of the ways right now in our current society is by looking past who people are physically and look at them as saved, as lost, as people needing to hear the truth. And so this morning, I encourage you to look at self. Make sure that you're not overlooking people because of their status in society, that you are not, and if you are discouraged by someone's status in society, maybe they're got some great leadership role. If you ever feel discouraged, I hope that you can find courage to teach whoever. No matter who they are, find courage to teach them. And if there's something I can do this morning to help you, and if I can, I'll find someone that will. Brother Vince is going to lead us in a song this morning, and anything I can do, please do not hesitate. Don't ever feel embarrassed to come to a brother and sister in Christ, to let them know how you are physically and spiritually. Always leave here knowing you have the chance to make yourself right with God or stronger with God. Take advantage of that time this morning as together we stand and we sing together.